welcome to episode 38 of the CRICKETher Vodcast here on CBeebies. Yes, well, anyway, episode 38, and we are here thanks to the magic of green screen at the Aegeus Bowl, home of the Southern Vipers. And the Southern Vipers have been in the news this week because, along with the other regional teams, they've announced a load of new contracts. We've now got more contracts than you can shake a stick at, and there'll be plenty of sticks shaken in this podcast, I can assure you. And we're going to be shaking our stick at a whole 41 domestic contracts in total. So we already had a pile of contracts that were announced kind of sort of during the COVID period. There were 20 or 25, depending on exactly how you count them, but there were 25 domestic professionals, and we're now up to 41. So, you know, what's the story, Raf? Who's been announced? What sort of people are we looking at?
So as you say, we had there were 20 regional retainers and then the 5 England rookies, and in addition to those who have all now carried over into having permanent full-time contracts, we also have 16 new contracted players, so 41 in total, for those of you who are good at maths. And I think it's really interesting looking at the list because it looks to me like there are two kind of categories of contracted player. And the first is your kind of quite young, very up-and-coming players who are sort of late teens, early 20s, who will really benefit from these contracts in the sense of quite likely to go on and play for England. Obviously nothing's a sure thing, but these are our kind of brightest young prospects, and that would be people like, I guess, Maya Boucher and Lauren Bell for the Southern Vipers, for Western Storm, Alex Griffiths, people like that really, people who are very likely to go on and play for England, and these contracts will really help them because it will allow them to devote a lot of time to cricket, and therefore will make them probably more likely to go on and kind of rise up into the international stardom. You've then got a second category, which is people who are a bit older, so probably looking at kind of mid-20s onwards, and who are much more of your kind of your very good domestic players, and you know, in other times they might well have fallen out of cricket, or decided that this is the point at which they are no longer a student, they've got to think about serious other careers to pursue, and don't really have enough time for their cricket, but now they're going to be able to stay in the system a bit longer, be a solid domestic player, and that would be probably people like Ailish Cranstone for the South East Stars. And also, I guess, Georgia Hennessy as well for Western Storm, somebody who maybe 7 years ago she was in the England Academy, and was potentially thought to be somebody who might go on and therefore play for England. Probably not going to happen now. And she's been through a difficult few years in terms of her cricket, and was probably thinking about chucking it all in altogether, to be honest, but has had a really good season for the Storm in the Rachel Hay Flint Trophy, and has now kind of earned a domestic contract. It's the renaissance of Georgia Hennessy, isn't it? So good for her, and it's good for the system really to retain players like that for a bit longer. So yeah, a couple of different categories there. So do you think that this is kind of the answer to all of those problems with our domestic system, Sid?
Well, I think it's undoubtedly, as you say, it's a brilliant thing for those particular players. And it's going to be life-changing in many cases, because for those youngest players, they'll have the chance to, train as much more full-time and, really push their skills at a very critical time in their development between the ages of sort of 19 and 22. For the other slightly older players, that's their opportunity, to stay in the system a bit longer, as you say. And it certainly does address some of the wider problems as well. One problem that we had from the start with the England contracts, when we had 5 or 6 years of like England contracts and then nothing below it, is that England were really reluctant to drop anybody from the England contracts, because dropping someone meant dropping them from a great height onto a cold, hard surface of nothing. It wouldn't quite be a cold, hard surface of nothing. That doesn't really work as an analogy, but bear with me, you know what I'm on about. That, by dropping somebody from the England system, you were leaving them, to go and get a job in a supermarket or something. So what this has done is it means that, in future, there's another level of contracts, and England can be more flexible about who they bring into the contracted system, and who they let go, because those people have got something to fall back on. So it can work much more like the men's system, where someone might come in for a year or so, or a couple of years, and then go back to county cricket or what have you. So that's good. That solves that part of the problem. But to a certain extent, one thing that concerns me here is that what you've done is you've taken that problem from the England level and you've actually pushed that downwards. Because one of the risks here is that you've still only got 4 or 5 contracts per region. And so the regional system now suffers exactly the same problem that England had before. That you've got now a cohort of players that have got these contracts. What happens next year and the year afterwards? Now, obviously, the hope originally was that they'd be able to expand these contracts and expand the number of contracts, up to something much larger. But these are going to be tough times. We know that the financial screw is being turned by the accountants at the ECB, because it's being turned for everybody. Not just in cricket, but across sport and across the world. So assuming that these are going to be the only contracts, the risk here for what happens is that this cohort just stays in place and gets older and older and older, and it becomes impossible for the next generation of 19-year-olds in 3 or 4 years' time to kind of break into that. So that's something that they are going to have to be wary of there. So I don't think it solves every problem, does it, Raf?
No, I don't think it does. I think you're absolutely right. And I think what will be interesting is actually if Lisa Kiteley is looking at the England contracts and thinking, oh, well, if I drop somebody from England, then they can just go and take up a regional contract. How does that actually work in practice? Because do you then kind of, in the middle of a regional contract, how do you either have to then drop somebody from a regional contract, which presumably actually the terms and conditions might not allow you to do, and then in order to accommodate your England player coming down, or do you have to generate a new contract from somewhere? And so I think that this idea that people can kind of move freely between the domestic contracts and the England contracts is actually a bit problematic.
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of logistical challenges around that. It's like, if someone drops down from an England contract and, they're effectively part of a regional setup already because they've lived somewhere their whole life, say one of the Yorkshire players that's always been in Yorkshire, what happens then? Does that mean that somebody existing on Yorkshire's contracts gets to lose their contract because of that?
Exactly.
The same the other way around. If they want to bring somebody out, do they have to push somebody back in the same direction? If they want to promote someone from Lancashire, say, sorry, did it again. If they want to promote someone from the Thunder, does that mean that the England player that kind of swaps around with them has to go back to the Thunder? How does that work? You can wind up with things looking quite unbalanced, and so there are a few challenges. But overall, I think we're in total agreement that this is not only great news for the players, but it's great news for the system. I think the other $64,000 question, isn't it, Raf, is is this kind of thing that's going to solve England's problems going forward? We know that England have challenges keeping up with Australia. Is this the kind of thing that is going to allow England to start mixing it up with Australia and be more competitive again on that international level? How do you feel about that?
Well, there's no doubt that it's a step in the right direction. But I think that we do have to ask ourselves, how professional are these professional contracts? And I think that they are being very much touted as professional contracts, but that's slightly misleading because our understanding is that these players are being told, keep doing your other jobs. And for some of them, that's good news, I suppose, because some of these players we know are in established careers, and therefore perhaps for them it might have been quite a cold, hard choice between carrying on with something that they're established in, or potentially risking that, giving that up for a couple of years on one of these domestic contracts. But it also does mean that for some of these players, and some of them, for example, are also students, full-time students. So that is going to limit the amount of time that they actually do get in the gym and on the in the nets and playing cricket and training. So we know that it's really all about the amount of time that you can devote to cricket. That makes you a better player, and that's the reason why the Australian system is so strong and why the WBBL and the WNCL are such strong competitions, especially the WBBL, where you do see these young players like your Phoebe Litchfields coming up through into the WBBL and really launching themselves on the scene young, it's because they've got all this time that they can devote to cricket. And actually, I'm just a bit concerned that that's not what we're replicating over here in England. What we're saying is, well, you can keep doing other work, and therefore you're not really almost like a proper full professional. And the other thing to say, of course, is that unlike the England contracts, where the ECB have never officially announced how much they're worth, and so a lot of what you see in the media about that is pure speculation, and often speculation on the high side.
Generous speculation.
We know exactly how much these contracts are worth. They're worth £18,000 a year. Now, for anyone watching in another country, that isn't a particularly generous salary for England. It's just above minimum wage, and our PCA, Professional Cricketers Association, last year said that their mandated minimum wage for a professional cricketer in this country was £27,500. So that puts these sums of money really into context and shows you that actually £18,000 doesn't go very far, so that's probably why these players are being told, keep doing other employment, because otherwise is it a particularly attractive option to take one of these contracts? So overall, I think it is a step in the right direction, but there are some significant caveats, and I think that some of the coverage around these contracts is very celebratory, and hasn't really recognised those caveats.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to emphasise that things are getting better. But the fact is that we've upgraded our car of domestic women's cricket, if you like. We had a banged up Ford Fiesta, and we've now got a nice Ford Cortina, or we would have if we were in the 70s. I haven't really kept up to date with cars, to be honest. To be frank about that. Ask your mum and dad if you're below the age of about 40. But we've upgraded to a nice Ford Cortina. It's got fur-lined seats and lettered windscreen and all that good stuff. But the Australians are still cruising ahead in a Ferrari, and ultimately this is not going to help us actually catch and overtake them. There's still a lot more work to do. But in fairness, the people at the ECB know that there's more work to do, and that's what we're all working towards. So are we going to get there in the next couple of years? Is it going to be a magic pill that solves everything? Well, probably not. Overall, the Australian system is likely to remain the strongest for the next 8 to 10 years, I would have thought. But this will be a very positive step for those individual players, and that's what's important here.
Absolutely. Now, one of the most interesting things about this announcement was actually contract number 41, because 41 is an odd number, isn't it, Sid?
Yes, Raf, it is an odd number. So your odd numbers go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and your even numbers go 2.
Sid, that's not what I meant. You're being an idiot.
I am. No, 41 obviously is an interesting number because it's not an even number. The point is that there is an extra contract in there. So we were expecting 40 contracts, and we've actually got 41. Where has the extra mysterious, spooky contract come from, Raf? How has this magic been done?
It's great because the ECB have actually got this graphic now that shows all of their women's pathway, and on it says 40 domestic professional contracts, and Western Storm and Gloucestershire have just come along and just crapped all over their graphic.
Scribbled out the 40 and penciled in 41.
So they've got to change that now. So basically, as I said, it's this 41st contract is not being funded by the ECB. It's being funded by Western Storm, essentially. So that means that Storm have effectively got 6 professional domestic contracted players, whereas all the other regions have got 5, which is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is actually the most interesting development of all last week, actually. Now, a few months ago now, you spoke to Jonathan Finch about the way that the pathways were going to work, and this was one question that you asked, wasn't it? That our county is going to have the ability to kind of be flexible and to decide what they want to do with the contracts and potentially bump up the amounts or bump up the numbers. And that's what they've done here. Western Storm have kind of laid laid a marker down and gone, well, we're going to employ an extra professional, and we're going to find the money some way to do that. So they're going to get some extra sponsorship and all that, and make that count for them. And if Western Storm end up winning next year's RHF or whatever it ends up being called, then people are going to point to that and go, well, they had an extra professional, and that's going to, the competition is going to step in at that point, and the Southern Vipers is going to be going, well, guys, we need an extra professional. Can we get some more sponsorship? And the guys at the Southern Vipers are going to be out looking for some more sponsorship to try and get an extra professional for them, and maybe that's how we work up. So I think that's really interesting, and I think that it's a pathway to employing even more people, and ultimately also a pathway towards independence, because what it's showing is that we can do this within the game ourselves. We don't need this to be funded by the ECB. We can go out and find the money to do this, and I think that all people ultimately will have the ability to do that, because as the names grow, they'll have the ability to, it'll be kind of self-fulfilling, that you get a virtuous circle of increased sponsorship, increased visibility, more money, and it all feeds into that. So definitely. I think that hopefully we can see other counties or other regions doing the same thing next year, and we'll grow the number of professionals that way.
Yeah, I was actually a bit surprised to see that Storm are the only region who have done it at the moment, because you would think that this would be something that Vipers would very much get behind, and that there probably is some money knocking around for them to be able to do that. So I wonder whether Storm have done this slightly last minute and kind of stolen the march on some of the other regions and been a bit secretive, and suddenly it's been announced, and maybe Charlotte Edwards at the Vipers is sat there going, So who knows, we may get announcements of other contracts forthcoming in the foreseeable, in the near future. So it's really exciting, as you say, definitely. Okay.
Well, that's all for this week, is it?
Yeah, I think so.
That's all for this week. The boss says so.
Thanks for checking in.
She's been Raf Nicholson. I've been Sid Egan. This has been the CRICKETher Vodcast. Thanks for watching. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.